Welcome to Infinite Universe with interesting episode. Ricky Nelson didn't want to perform again at first. For about 2 years, people had been asking him to do a big show. Eventually, he gave in, thinking that since 22,000 people were going to be there, he could perform some new songs. But when the day came, he didn't sing anything new. He sang only his old hits. The crowd just stared at him, and the entire experience felt strange and uncomfortable. This performance happened around 6 months after Ricky tragically died in a plane crash in 1985. At the time of his death, everyone believed Ricky was broke. His divorce had cost him $1 million, and he owed money all over the place. People thought his kids would inherit nothing but debt. But everything changed when his brother discovered a hidden will. Lawyers got involved and uncovered something shocking. Record companies had been stealing money from Ricky for decades. What followed was a massive legal battle. The settlement numbers were so huge that even the judge was stunned. As a result, Ricky's 4 children became millionaires almost overnight. But strangely, one of his sons didn't get anything, and the reason for that is unbelievable. Ricky Nelson was born on May 8, 1940, in Tenafly, New Jersey. His family was already famous. His father, Ozzie Nelson, was a big band leader, and his mother, Harriet Hilliard, was a successful movie actress. From the beginning, Ricky's life was very public. Even when he was still wearing diapers, his family's radio show, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, was already loved by people all over America. Instead of growing up quietly like most kids, Ricky grew up in recording studios and on film sets. Dinners at home often turned into rehearsal time, and vacations sometimes became part of the show. Everything in his life felt like a scene from a movie, even the most ordinary moments. In 1949, when Ricky was just 8 years old, he joined the family radio show along with his older brother, David. While most kids were playing outside or collecting baseball cards, Ricky was learning lines and cashing paychecks. He became a star before he even turned 10. People loved his natural way of talking and acting, and by the time he was 10 years old, he was already well known across the country. But all of this fame came at a cost. He didn't get to enjoy a normal childhood. There were no birthday parties with school friends or playing on sports teams. Instead, there were lights, cameras, and constant responsibility. Ricky suffered from asthma, and it wasn't mild. It often kept him home from school and isolated from friends. Even walking across a room could leave him short of breath. While other kids were running around, Ricky spent time alone, reading books or listening to music. This quiet and thoughtful side became part of his charm later in life. On camera, he appeared calm and intense, but behind that image was a lonely boy just trying to feel normal and breathe comfortably. The family radio show began in 1944, but Ozzie and Harriet initially hired actors to play their sons. Ricky and David weren't happy about that. They wanted to be part of the show and eventually convinced their parents to let them do it. By 1949, they were officially playing themselves. This mix of real family life and entertainment was new and unusual. But it worked. Ratings soared, and the audience became obsessed with the Nelsons. Ricky was living his real life in front of millions. This made the Nelsons America's first reality TV family long before that term even existed. In 1957, everything changed again for Ricky. He was 17 when he performed Fats Domino's song I'm Walking on the family TV show. The performance was electric, and girls across America fell in love with him. The single sold more than 1 million copies. Almost overnight, Ricky became a teenage heartthrob. But while fans saw a clean-cut teen idol, Ricky's real life was much more complicated. He was partying, dating many girls, and driving fast cars. Fame had opened every door, and Ricky eagerly stepped through them. His parents were worried. Ozzie and Harriet were more than just parents, they were his managers and producers. They didn't like how many girls Ricky was dating. They believed that love and relationships would distract him from his work. Ozzie was particularly strict. Even though Ricky was earning $500 a week while still a teenager, his father kept tight control over the money and gave him only a small allowance. Ozzie didn't want Ricky getting spoiled or distracted. In 1957, Ricky's first single with Imperial Records, Bebop Baby, made history. It had 750,000 advance orders before it even hit the stores. When it was released, it sold more than 1 million copies and reached the top 5 on both the pop and R&B charts. Ricky wasn't just a teen idol anymore, he was a major part of the music business. His debut album Ricky topped the charts, and he became the youngest artist at the time to have an album at number 1. While Elvis Presley ruled the radio, Ricky ruled both the airwaves and TV screens. Songs like Bebop Baby and Have I Told You Lately That I Love You were already popular before the album was officially out. Ozzie Nelson, ever the businessman, saw an opportunity and used the family show to promote Ricky's music. At the end of each episode, Ricky would perform a new song. 10 million people watched every week, and it worked like magic. When Ricky performed I'm Walking on the show, the song jumped to number 4 on the charts. The B-side, A Teenager's Romance, reached number 2. Ricky's parents carefully controlled where and how he performed. Ozzie wouldn't even let Ricky go on the Ed Sullivan Show because he wanted to keep all the attention on their own program. Then in 1958, Ricky recorded Poor Little Fool, a song written by 15-year-old Sharon Sheeley. He didn't want to release it, but the record label ignored him. Radio stations loved it, and the song became the first ever to top Billboard's new Hot 100 chart. It stayed at number 1 for 2 weeks and crossed over into country and R&B charts. That song made Ricky a permanent part of music history. From 1957 to 1962, Ricky had 20 songs in the top 40, only Elvis had more during that period. His contract with Imperial Records was also groundbreaking. He was guaranteed $50,000 over 5 years and had full control over his songs and album artwork. That kind of deal was rare, especially for a teenager. His fan club had 9,000 chapters around the world, and by 1960, Ricky was known everywhere. In 1959, he also acted in the movie Rio Bravo with John Wayne and Dean Martin. His role as Colorado Ryan earned him a Golden Globe nomination for Most Promising Newcomer. But fame brought more than awards. Ricky started spending recklessly. He wore custom suits, drove luxury cars, and visited elite clubs. His monthly allowance was reportedly $5,000, which would be around $50,000 in today's money. Fame was changing him. In 1961, Ricky took a chance on a song called Travelin' Man after Sam Cooke passed on it. The song went to number 1 in April 1961 and sold over 1 million copies within weeks. Its B-side, Hello Mary Lou, also became a hit. But behind the scenes, Ricky was facing new challenges. He was frustrated with older musicians who didn't respect rock and roll. Some even refused to play his music the way he wanted. Ricky eventually fired them and built his own band with younger players who shared his vision. One of them, James Burton, would become a legend in his own right. But then came the British invasion. In 1964, the Beatles arrived in America and changed everything. By April, they held the top 5 spots on the Billboard charts. Even Elvis struggled to compete. Ricky's music started slipping from the charts. His song For You barely made the top 40 that year. Ricky met Chris Harmon, daughter of football star Tom Harmon and actress Elise Knox, on Christmas Day in 1961. He was 21, and she was 16. Their relationship seemed perfect, but it turned into a painful story. When they got married in 1963, Chris was already pregnant, and her Catholic family insisted on a quick ceremony. Ricky, who wasn't Catholic, had to agree to raise their children in the faith. The wedding wasn't about love or joy, it was about expectations and image. Strangely, Ozzie and Harriet liked Chris. They had rejected many of Ricky's previous girlfriends but were happy about this match. But Chris had grown up in wealth and expected the same lifestyle. Ricky tried to provide it, but the money kept disappearing. They bought homes, luxury items, and went on expensive trips without thinking about saving. As Ricky's career slowed in the mid-1970s, money became a big problem. He had to keep touring to support the family while Chris wanted him at home. Their marriage eventually ended with $1 million legal fight. Even though Chris acted in the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet for a while, their combined income didn't help because they never managed their finances properly. They were surrounded by assistants, agents, and financial advisors, but no one helped them manage money wisely. The pressure of maintaining their public image became too much. Chris began distancing herself from Ricky and their marriage started to fall apart. In 1965, they starred together in a film called Love and Kisses, directed by Ozzy. The story was about a young couple who elope and struggle living with parents. It seemed like a comedy, but it reflected their real-life troubles. Ricky played a high schooler even though he was 25, and critics weren't impressed with Chris' acting. The movie blurred the line between fiction and real life in a way that made many viewers uncomfortable. By 1969, Ricky was trying to move forward. He formed the Stone Canyon Band to blend rock with country music. He brought in talented musicians like Randy Meisner, who later joined the Eagles. The band was good, but Ricky had to perform in small clubs for very little money. Meisner eventually left because the pay was so bad. Ricky was chasing creative freedom, but it was costing him everything. Then came the night that nearly destroyed him. On October 15, 1971, Ricky performed at Madison Square Garden during a rock and roll concert. He thought the crowd would embrace his new sound, but instead, they booed him. He had dropped the Y from Ricky to go by Rick and tried to move in a new musical direction. He performed Honky Tonk Women, but fans wanted his old hits. Some people said the boos were because of police actions in the crowd, not his music. But Rick believed they didn't accept the new version of him. He left the stage in shame. Eventually, he returned to play his classic songs, and the crowd cheered. But something inside him was broken that night. He turned the pain into music. In 1972, he wrote Garden Party, a deeply personal song about that moment. The chorus said everything: "You can't please everyone, so you got to please yourself." This marked a turning point in his life. He learned to focus on what mattered to him rather than trying to live up to everyone else's expectations. Despite all the fame, money, and attention, Ricky Nelson was someone who, in the end, just wanted to be true to himself. Rick Nelson was once one of America's biggest pop stars. He had fame, good looks, and a voice that made people fall in love with his songs. For a while, it seemed like everything he touched turned to gold. But things didn't stay that way. Years later, when one of his songs made it to number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100 and was certified gold, it felt like he was finally making a comeback. Fans who had forgotten about him or moved on to other artists started singing along again. It had been nearly 10 years since he had a top 10 hit, and this sudden success gave him hope. But that hope didn't last very long. The songs that came after that hit didn't perform well. One of his singles, called Palace Guard, failed to chart or get much attention. His record label didn't know what to do with him anymore. His albums like Windfall didn't sell well either. Rick started taking jobs that were far from the bright lights of stardom. He performed at amusement parks and accepted small acting roles on television. Eventually, his label, MCA Records, dropped him. That earlier song that had briefly brought him back into the spotlight became both a small victory and a quiet goodbye. Rick Nelson, once seen as a golden boy of American pop, was now struggling just to stay afloat. And by the mid-1970s, his personal life was falling apart as well. His marriage to Chris Nelson was breaking down. To the outside world, they still looked like a happy couple, but inside the relationship, things were not okay. They stayed together for appearances, not for love. Rick was always on the road, touring constantly in an effort to pay for their expensive lifestyle. They had private schools to pay for, multiple luxury homes, and an ever-growing pile of bills. But the more Rick worked, the more he and Chris drifted apart. She felt abandoned and lonely, while Rick felt trapped and burdened by everything. What little conversation they had usually turned into arguments. Their once peaceful home was now a place full of tension, sadness, and silence. In 1977, after one more long tour away from home, Rick returned expecting a warm welcome. But what he found stunned him. He had been locked out of his house. Chris had packed all of his belongings and moved them to a rental house. And when Rick arrived at the rental house, Chris was already inside and she wasn't alone. She was with 2 cheerleaders from the Los Angeles Rams. Rick was deeply hurt and humiliated. That shocking moment made it crystal clear to him that their relationship had reached the end of the road. There was no going back from this. Chris later claimed that she did it for the sake of their children, saying that Rick's rumored drug use had made the home environment unsafe. Rick's management team strongly denied those claims. But the truth didn't matter much at that point, the damage had already been done. The love between Rick and Chris had disappeared. The trust was broken. Their marriage was now beyond repair. Despite everything, in 1980, Rick tried to start over. He bought a mansion that once belonged to legendary actor Errol Flynn. It was located on Mulholland Drive and cost him $750,000. Rick thought this new home could be a fresh beginning for his family. He hoped that maybe he and Chris could fix their relationship if they had a new environment. But Chris had a different view. She told Rick that she didn't want him to be a musician anymore. She wanted him to quit the music business and become a full-time actor. But Rick couldn't do that. He was drowning in debt and needed to perform and tour to survive financially. He couldn't just walk away from his music. Instead of peace, the mansion brought more stress. Strange things began happening in the house. The family said they heard strange noises at night. Lights would flicker for no reason. Rumors started to spread that the mansion was haunted. But the bigger nightmare wasn't ghosts, it was money. The house was expensive to maintain, and it drained Rick's already tight finances. What was supposed to be a dream home turned into another source of pain and pressure. The divorce between Rick and Chris got ugly. Chris accused Rick of using drugs and being an unfit father. She told the court that if she stayed with him, their kids could die. Rick didn't stay quiet either. He said Chris was an alcoholic and that she left the children with the staff while she went out partying. The legal battle dragged on for 5 long years. Both Rick and Chris spent over $1 million just on lawyers. Their emotions were torn to pieces, and the saddest part was that their children had to witness it all. They watched their parents argue in court, say awful things about each other, and slowly destroy any good memories they had as a family. Finally, in 1982, the divorce was finalized. The court ordered Rick to pay $4,000 each month in child support. He got joint custody of their 4 children, Tracy, Gunnar, Matthew, and Sam, who were between the ages of 8 and 19 at the time. But by then, Rick was nearly broke. The years of legal fights, unpaid bills, and personal stress had drained him. He kept touring night after night just to keep up with child support payments and living expenses. Emotionally, he felt crushed. His health began to suffer. His energy was gone. The joy he once found in music seemed to have disappeared. By 1985, Rick was desperately hoping for another chance at success. But he faced a serious problem. He had a deep fear of flying. Even though flying made him uncomfortable, he didn't want to travel on long tour buses either. So he made a risky decision. He bought a used airplane for $118,000. It was a very old plane, a 1944 Douglas DC-3 that once belonged to rock and roll legend Jerry Lee Lewis. Rick thought this plane would give him privacy and save him money on travel. But the plane turned out to be a nightmare. The engines were unreliable, and parts kept breaking down. On more than one occasion, Rick's band members had to physically push the plane off the runway. Everyone who flew on it was afraid for their safety. Guitarist Bobby Neal's wife begged him not to fly on it. Bassist Patrick Woodward had already survived 2 emergency landings on that same plane. Pianist Andy Chapin didn't want to get on it either. But Rick didn't listen to any of them. He was under pressure to keep his shows going. Canceling performances meant losing money, and Rick couldn't afford that. In September 1985, the plane had engine problems again, causing Rick to miss a major opportunity at a music event called Far Aid. That missed performance could have been a turning point in his career. Still, he didn't give up on the plane. On December 31, 1985, the last day of the year, the plane was once again delayed for hours due to mechanical problems. But Rick boarded it anyway. He was headed to Dallas for a New Year's Eve concert. He hoped the show would mark a fresh start for the new year. But tragedy struck mid-air. Somewhere over Texas, smoke filled the cabin. It became so thick that the pilots couldn't see the flight instruments. The pilot, Brad Rank, was forced to stick his head out the cockpit window just to fly the plane blindly. Around 5:14 p.m., the aircraft crashed in a field just 2 miles from the landing strip near Dallas. Witnesses said the plane was trailing black smoke and flying unevenly before it clipped some trees and burst into flames. The wreckage was scattered over a stretch of land more than 150 yards long. Only the 2 pilots survived, escaping through the cockpit windows. Everyone else on board died in the fiery crash. Rick Nelson was only 45 years old. His fiancée, Helen Blair, was with him. So were 5 members of his band and crew: sound technician Donald Clark Russell, pianist Andy Chapin, drummer Rick Intveld, guitarist Bobby Neal, and bassist Patrick Woodward. The fire from the crash was so intense that authorities had to rely on autopsies to confirm their identities. The music world was left in shock. One of the most beloved teen idols of the 1950s and 60s had died just hours before the new year. Things only became more complicated after his death. Rick's financial situation was a mess. He had divorced Chris Harmon, had 4 children, and was engaged to Helen Blair. But Helen wasn't mentioned in his will. Neither was his ex-wife nor his mother. To make matters worse, Rick's estate was reportedly more than $1 million in debt. The money had been drained by years of legal fees, unpaid bills, and the cost of keeping the vintage DC-3 plane running, the very plane that led to his tragic death. For a while, it seemed like Rick had died without leaving a will behind. Chris, his ex-wife, said she couldn't find one and tried to take control of his estate. But then, Rick's brother, David Nelson, came forward with a will that had been written just 4 months before the crash. The will named Rick's 4 children as the only heirs and made David the executor in charge of the estate. Even though there was now a will, the estate was so deeply in debt that it wasn't clear if the children would receive anything at all. Chris wasn't happy with how things turned out. She tried to claim part of Rick's life insurance, even though they were no longer married. She also went to court to challenge David's role as executor. The legal battle got worse, with old accusations resurfacing, from drug use to financial irresponsibility to being an unfit parent. Millions had already been lost in divorce court, and now more lawyers were getting involved. Then came another shock. Rick had a son that almost no one knew about. His name was Eric Jude Crew. He was born in 1980 after Rick had a short relationship with a woman named Georgian Crew. At first, Rick denied being Eric's father. But in 1981, a court-ordered blood test proved that he was indeed the biological father. The court ordered Rick to pay $400 a month in child support. However, he reportedly stopped making those payments after a while. In his will, Rick said the paternity of Eric was still disputed and left him out completely. After Rick's death, Georgian fought in court for her son's share of the estate. But the court upheld the will, and Eric received nothing. At the same time, Helen Blair's parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit. They believed the crash was due to poor maintenance on the plane and wanted financial compensation. The families of the other victims joined them. Soon, multiple lawsuits were filed. Creditors demanded payment. Georgian fought for Eric. Chris fought for insurance money. It felt like everyone was fighting over what was left of Rick's legacy. But what most people didn't realize was that Rick's true fortune wasn't in cash or property. It was in his music. His song catalog and royalties, especially from digital platforms like iTunes and streaming services, were worth a hidden fortune. But the record labels were quietly taking that money. In 2011, the Nelson estate filed a lawsuit against Capitol Records, claiming between $100 and $250 million. The lawsuit accused the company of hiding unmatched income, money it claimed couldn't be connected to specific artists, and underpaying Rick's estate. Capitol was using outdated deductions like breakage fees, which were meant for damaged vinyl records or CDs, and wrongly applying them to digital downloads. The estate argued that this was fraud. Millions of dollars were being stolen through sneaky accounting tricks. Capitol also refused to provide a full audit, which made it impossible for Rick's family to know how much money they were really owed. In 2014, the case was finally settled. Capitol agreed to pay an undisclosed amount and promised to improve transparency. Rick's legal team called it a major victory. But the battle wasn't over yet. In 2020, the estate sued Sony Music. This time, the lawsuit focused on international streaming. Sony was accused of using something called intercompany fees, where different offices of Sony charged each other and reduced royalty payments before they reached the artists. Up to 68% of Rick's royalties were disappearing before his family ever saw a penny. That case ended with a massive $12.7 million settlement and an agreement to increase Rick's streaming royalties by 36% moving forward. Finally, after decades of struggle, Rick's children began to receive real money from their father's music. His life had been full of ups and downs, from fame to heartbreak, from success to tragedy. But even after death, Rick Nelson's legacy lived on through his music, which continued to touch people's hearts all around the world. Thanks for watching. Keep it and stay tuned. Like and subscribe our channel. Have a good day.